Dear respected Tay, dear noble community, good morning everyone. Welcome to Blue Cliff. Please make sure you're comfortable. We have seats in the back, or if you'd like, there's some mats and cushions up here. Inviting everyone to sit comfortably and to come back to your breath. Just the feeling of the rise and fall of your belly as we listen to 3 sounds of the bell to bring us into the present moment with our breath. Dear noble community, good morning. Today is August 31st, 2025. We're in the Great Togetherness Meditation Hall at Blue Cliff Monastery. And today is a day of mindfulness, and it's also the last day of a retreat for business people. So welcome to our friends who have just come for the day. And just to fill you in, the theme of the retreat for the business people retreat was mindfulness as a condition for stable happiness. So in the last retreat before this, we had one of our largest retreats, the Vietnamese retreat, and I had the joy of being with the children. And we had a chance to practice something what we called ocean breathing. So I'd like to invite you to take a few minutes as we ground ourselves in this peaceful environment to come back to what we call ocean breathing. Okay? So you may like to close your eyes. And when we've just been quite active, sometimes it's hard to catch the awareness of our breath. So we might like to take a few deep breaths. So taking a deep breath, you can even breathe so you can actually hear yourself breathing in. And then breathing out, we breathe out almost twice the length of our in-breath. Just a slow out-breath. So we're breathing through the nose, right? But it may sound like this to you. In. Out. Let's do that for 2 more times. Deep in-breath, you can feel your lungs, your belly inflating. And then a slow ocean out-breath. Feeling the body deflating, the chest deflating. One more time, in a deep in-breath. And then following the out-breath all the way through, a long out-breath. Now we continue breathing, but we don't need to exaggerate the breath. Just taking note, like waves rising and falling. Attentive, feeling the body inflating. As we rise, feeling the body contracting as our breath leaves. We can be attentive to the sound of the breath. Just aware of the sound, no thinking. Collective rise and fall. Allowing our body to move with the breath as it needs. It's like we're bobbing on the ocean. Noticing the out-breath still a little bit longer than the in-breath. Noticing the meeting point between in and out breath at that pause. Allowing the breath to become natural. Resting in the breath. Thank you. Listen to one sound of the bell. Dear friends, I was reflecting recently about life in a community of mindfulness, an intentional community where we always emphasize being more aware of ourselves, more aware of our community and of our environment. And my reflections took me to this quote that I remembered from a long time ago about how wisdom manifests in our life. They say that we are fortunate and wise if we can learn from our past mistakes. Right? Those of us who don't, we keep bumping across the same issue, coming across the same suffering, and not knowing what to do. Right? So we are very fortunate if we can learn from our experiences and we grow in wisdom. And also, we are even more fortunate and we are even more wise if we can learn from the experiences of not just ourselves, but our community, of those around us, and of course, those who have come before us. So in our community, that means the lineage of spiritual ancestors from the Buddha all the way down to our teacher, and then to our elder siblings and to our community. And in the family, it means that we are fortunate and wise if we learn from the wisdom and experiences and pitfalls of our ancestors, our blood ancestors, our parents, our grandparents, etc. When I lived in New Hamlet, I was still quite young as a novice, and I liked to sleep on the ground. And at that time, the tile on the ground was it's like a cold tile. And in the winter, it can get quite cold. So not knowing, I would just put my sleeping bag and a couple layers of blankets is soft enough and warm enough. One of my elder sisters told me that that was not wise. She told me that if I sleep like that, over a period of time, I'm going to get arthritis. I'm going to get joint soreness because the dampness from the tiles will seep up, and even if I don't feel it and I don't know it, it will. And by the time I get to her age, I will suffer. And so, even though I didn't really believe what she said, because I can't see the tiles, I don't see the water vapor, and I felt very comfortable in my body, but I took it to heart anyway, because I could see that she was earnest and she was sharing from her experience. So there are many causes and conditions to how we are physically, but I'd like to share the good news is that I'm 52, 53 right now, and no pain. And I'm very thankful for that kind of sharing, sharing from experience. So sometimes those sharings come directly as advice to us. And sometimes it comes from observing the things that happen around us and to those before us. But sometimes we don't learn from that. My grandmother had diabetes. She, single mother of 3 young girls growing up in the time of war. And all the causes and conditions, many, but she developed diabetes in her later age. And when my mother when she came over to the States, my mother took care of her, and she was very, very diligent and very careful to root out any further damage to diabetes. So she took care to learn about diabetes, to know how to take care of it, to keep it at where she was. And she took it one step further, and that's something that I'm deeply grateful. She also took it to heart what her mother went through. She also changed her lifestyle, as difficult as it is, as a busy person working with a family with a lot of stress, but she made those changes so that she wouldn't also become diabetic for her sake and for her family's sake. And so I see, reflecting back on my family history, that I'm also the recipient of that careful attention that my mother had towards my grandmother, to not pass down habits, not just the illness, but habits of way of having, living in a way that would create easy conditions for me to be ill, like my grandmother. So sometimes these experiences come just from our reflections of what has gone well or not so well in our history, and we learn from them. But there is also another saying, besides the saying that I just shared about things happen, right? Things just happen, and then it's like a road bump and we move forward. But that, of course, is the way of lack of mindfulness. We feel no connection with the things that happen to us. We have suffering. We have no connection with the suffering. It just seems to happen, and we don't invest time to really reflect, be more mindful about our way of life, to look more deeply, to make the changes that perhaps we should make in our life. So it takes certain elements for us to really create and maintain change, to transform the suffering in our life, so that it's not just it happens, and then it happens again, and then it happens again. And that is why we look at mindfulness very carefully as a key component to the key of unlocking the door to our happiness, so that we don't keep bumping our head against that brick of suffering. There's a term in Buddhism called samvega, and it means a deep sense of urgency, spiritual urgency. And that is what the Buddha experienced before he set off to find a way out. So let's take a look at the Buddha's life, see what we can maybe glean from his experience. Talking about learning from our elders, these are eldest in the spiritual community. The Buddha was a prince. He was a very successful in all of his endeavors, in studies, in athletics. He excelled in all areas, and he was surrounded, as a prince he was surrounded by riches. His circle was influential. People were very powerful. He had access to all sorts of things that the normal person wouldn't. Sensual pleasures. There was nothing that he couldn't have in worldly life. As he grew older, he had the chance to start to experience suffering unexpectedly. On his first outing outside of the palace, even though his father, the king Shuddhadana, tried very much to shield him because he had an understanding that his son, it was projected that he would become a great ruler, either spiritually or politically. And because his father was afraid that he would lose his son in that direction, he tried to shield him from these seeds that would waken that spiritual side to his son. So up until quite an older age, he never witnessed old age, sickness, or death until he stepped outside the palace walls. And once he stepped outside, he couldn't help but see. He saw an image of an old man who was aging. He saw an image of someone who was sick. He saw a funeral procession. And these new sights shook him up. It awakened in him what we call samvega, that spiritual urgency to seek some sort of change in one's life. Because now one has touched something deeper, has awakened to something deeper of reality that he was not aware of before. So of all those images, the person who was aging, the person who was sick, the person who had died, the fourth image that struck him was the image of an ascetic, a wandering, holy person. That opened up for him the awareness that there is a way to seek a way out of this suffering. So this samvega, this spiritual urgency, is a way of looking for a direction out of suffering, out of the things that normally push and pull us. Last week we had a very lovely talk by our brother. Brother Fatwat gave a talk about the 8 winds, the 8 worldly winds that tend to push and pull us in the direction of worldly concerns. Siddhartha, he wanted to go deeper, to be free of all these things so that he could address those ultimate concerns that not just he had, but all of his loved ones had. Because he realized, if I can get old, if I can get sick, and if I can die, that can happen to my loved ones as well. So he was moved with deep, deep concern and compassion to find a way out, not just for himself, but for his loved ones as well. So now we take a moment now to kind of come back to modern day. That was over 2,600 years ago. And the Buddha's life, just like any great person's life, can be looked up in a book and put on a shelf, and it gets dusty, and it has no bearing on us. But let us take a look now at how this might apply to us. What can we learn from our modern day experience? In his early life, he was shielded. His father did his best to put up walls to protect him from feeling more deeply, seeing more deeply. In our daily life, what are some of the walls, the distractions, the entertainments that we ourselves, not just other people, but we ourselves put up so that we don't have to touch more deeply those deepest concerns of our collective humanity, old age, sickness, death. In American society, and perhaps in many Western societies, it's considered taboo to talk about things like that. You don't bring that up at dinner time conversations, certainly not at a party. But in other spiritual spaces and cultures, it is actually recommended that we become familiar with this language of change, so that it's not something so scary, so that when our loved ones fall sick, when they have an accident, when they pass away, we will be more prepared, and we will not be frittering our time away in the meantime, so that we can meet things with equanimity. So question for ourselves, what are the kind of things that we put up for ourselves? How do we distract ourselves from just being present when we see something unpleasant as war, as unpleasant as death? Even in the family, when we have family friends or friends who are ill, who have terminal illness, we only need to look at our relationship with these things. How do we turn away from, and what do we turn to distract ourselves? So these are some of the walls that we put up. Many of us, especially those who are very talented, those who are very skilled in their work, who have high ambitions, they pour all their energy into their work because it is very, it's very beneficial for many people to do your job well, to excel in your career well is very beneficial. And at the same time, it is a kind of possibly a sneaky way that we try to escape ourselves through our work. So how many of us here can relate to that? Either you yourself have this relationship with work or entertainment that takes you, that you know that you're using to distract yourself. Right? Yeah, it's either ourselves or someone actually we might love very much. It might be our partner or our parents or our colleagues. So we take from the Buddha's example. He saw that there was something underlying the surface pleasures of life that he wanted to understand and be able to be free from. Not that he could live forever, or not that he could never be sick, but that he could not suffer, because to be at peace with those things, to be free in that way, to understand and be at peace with the cycle of life and death. So here we are in a monastery because, in a way, even though we might not know it, we are following in the Buddha's footsteps. We too might be touching some dissatisfaction in our life. We know something is not quite right. we may be feeling quite anxious all the time, quite stressed, not able to sleep, always worried, always being dragged into the future or the past. And we are seeking a way out. And we've come to a place, a spiritual place, like a monastery, a practice center, because in our hearts we know that the way out isn't to change those elements outside, to get more stuff, to make more money, to change that other person. Deep down, we know that the transformation needs to happen somewhere inside of us. And there's a very famous Buddhist monk in the 8th century, Shantideva, who shared with us an image of putting shoes on, putting leather under your feet in order to soothe the pain rather than carpeting the whole earth with leather. It makes a lot more sense to take care of what's inside so that we can transform and be at ease, at peace with our surroundings, than to try to transform those things outside of us that we have no control of. The exact quote is, "Where could I find enough leather to cover the whole earth? But by the leather of one pair of sandals, the earth will be covered." So we're here in order to find that pair of shoes for our heart, our mind. Perhaps a bell. That sense of spiritual urgency that brings us together as a community is samvega. So mindfulness as a impetus for a stable happiness. Can you see that circle, or is that too? All right. So we're here to understand more deeply our relationship, our spiritual practice, so that we can find concrete ways to move past or transcend or transform our suffering. So throughout this time that you've been here for the retreat and also for this day of mindfulness, we will have a chance to come back to what we call mindful breathing. And mindful breathing in and of itself, as we've experienced just now, it can be very healing, because when we are fully with the breath, we cut off all the chatter that tends to push us into the future or make us wallow in the past. Did you experience that space of freedom, even if it was just for that one long in-breath and one deep out-breath? Right? You were free from that thinking because your mind is fully attentive to that sensation of the in, and we exaggerate it just so that we can bring our full attention to it, the quality of it, the length of it, And in that moment, we have touched freedom. And even though that freedom only maybe lasts 5 seconds, it's our toehold. It's the beginning of our mind's freedom to investigate more clearly, with more clarity and more stability into those things that make us suffer. So please don't think that mindful breathing or any of our mindfulness practices is a way of temporarily running away from your suffering. It is the very inroads to taking care to transform our suffering. So when we breathe and we are touching what is happening right in this moment, that means we are bringing our mind back to what the body is doing in the very present moment. It means we've freed ourselves from the prison of future and the prison of past, right? So it's a very useful tool to bring us back, to shield us from that wastage, that energy that we waste when we keep thinking and thinking and thinking and worrying and worrying and worrying about the past and the future. So when we say breathing in, I'm aware of the in-breath from beginning to end. Breathing out, I'm aware of the out-breath from beginning to end. It's to create from one present moment to the next a continuous awareness, a continuous presence in the present moment. So breathing in, pause, breathing out, in, out, like that. And of course, our practice, we don't have a deep capacity to stay grounded in the breath without getting distracted. But the more we train to come back, the easier it gets. Just like anything, it's like a training of the mind. We train our muscles, the more we train our muscles, the stronger our muscles get. The more we train our mind to let go of the thought and come back to the breath, the easier, the more facile the mind is to do so. So we practice mindful breathing as a concrete way of practicing mindfulness of each present moment as it arises. Now, in a very peaceful space like this, your present moment might be just the breath, just the out-breath. But there are times when we are, of course, most of the time, when in our present moment something is going on. There's a strong feeling, a strong emotion. There's a distraction. And so our practice of mindful breathing then expands to embrace whatever it is that comes up. Okay? So that's why we say it is not an escape, but it is a way of learning how to fully embrace with full presence. Not like, okay, I know it's there and I'm going to ignore it. But to learn how to face more fully what it is and say, I see you. And not just I see you, but I'm there for you. So our teacher has this way of kind of encapsulating the essence of our practice. The present moment is a time when we can be nourished by the things that we have maybe neglected. And this place is a wonderful place to connect with that, the fresh air. One of my sisters, whenever the sun is out, she enjoys so much just to come out to the sun, just to feel the sun. So many of us are so busy now that we don't connect so much with nature. And so when we come back to this place of stopping to be, just simply be, we can start to be nourished by the simple things, and not to feel like we have to run after something much larger, much farther away from us. Okay. So as we continue to become more mindful of our breath, it opens up the space to be more aware of others who are sharing our space. And that's the first step of learning how to learn from one another's experiences. If I'm not aware of you, then how can I learn from your experiences? And if I'm not even aware of my own experiences, if I shut myself out, I'm afraid to touch that fear or that anxiety, then how can I learn from that experience? Right? So we were talking earlier about this good fortune and this wisdom that we potentially have if we open our heart to learn from one another and learn from ourselves. And now we know that the only way we can actually learn from ourselves and others is if we practice to be present, right? Present for ourselves and present for others. Okay. So I'd like to take a deeper dive into what mindfulness can help us concretely with. Mindfulness opens us up to a healthier relationship with many aspects that cause us suffering in our daily life. But in order, first of all, for us to be looking at the more difficult things, we have to first of all be aware of what is nourishing for us. So mindfulness helps us to touch the nourishment in the now. That's different from nourishment in the future. It's not when I finally get that raise, or when that person finally acknowledges me. But really to challenge us to really see what's right in front of us. Like right now, as we breathe in, there are so many conditions that can be nourishing for us when we bring it to our awareness. Can you maybe volunteer a few? It's called collective gladdening of the mind. What are you nourished by right in this in-breath? And if no one answers, it means we have a very heavy layer of mud over our present moment. What's nourishing you in, yes? Community, okay. Let me ask, how often do you sit in community like this? Maybe just during a day of mindfulness, right? Every other day, okay. Okay. Well, community, it's not something that's common to have an intentional community, so that's quite wonderful. Yes, Ben? Stillness, and that is in this present moment. And do you touch stillness often in your daily life? No. Okay. Anyone else? Yes. A baby deer that makes our friends smile. It touches, yes. Someone over here. Yes, in the back. You smell something is that a good smell? I don't smell it. Is it good? Is it the incense? These things seem like on the surface, they seem so mundane, right? If you just kind of strip it away, it seems mundane. But perhaps it's because we've been trained to always look for the supersized, overcharged things to make us aware of them. So here in a space where spiritually we're turning inward, we're tuning down the outside so we can hear the nourishments, the more subtle things. Okay? So just because they're subtle doesn't mean they're deeply worthy of being held and a foundation for our happiness. The nourishment of the now. When we are present for those in the present moment, just like the breath, when we are fully present for the breath, it serves as a protection, an anchor, so we keep ourselves grounded in the present, even though maybe a thought will come up that pulls us, but we will have enough nourishment to come back to the present moment. Many of us who do not ever have a practice, you can see this in your families, for example, or your colleagues. They've never experienced a place, a space, a time where they can just come back to themselves. They're on overdrive because their answer to problems is to try to run and seek and do more. So they're constantly, it's like a spinning wheel. They're on overdrive, and it's just a concrete recipe to burnout. So this is so important to ground us in the nourishment of what is happening now. So yeah, you can put it down and come out and touch the sun. You can put it down and come back and touch the stillness of your breath, the calmness of your heart, for example. And also, it's important because what we do not see or appreciate, we will tend to waste. Just like water, right? Or food. If we don't really see what we're eating, we'll take a lot and we can waste it. We'll abuse it. We'll take too much of it. We'll throw it away. So this nourishment in the now is also a way of being compassionate towards ourselves, our environment. Okay, so this is just like we always begin with the positive thing to strengthen us. We can bring our mindfulness to bear, our mindful breathing to bear, not just on the conditions outside, but the conditions inside that might not be so peaceful. Our thinking is quite turbulent because we cannot control our thoughts. But what we can learn to control is our relationship with our thoughts so that we don't feed them further. So there's such a thing as catastrophic thinking. I'm just going to give you an extreme because we're kind of on that spectrum. Some of us, we tip into catastrophic thinking because once we start thinking about something negative, it pulls us in that direction, even though we're not thinking catastrophe, but we're maybe halfway there. So the initial thought that comes up is the place where we practice to breathe in with the thought. How many of us here feel like you kind of perseverate or worry about the future? Right? Okay. So please know that we're not saying those things don't exist. We're saying that the focus as a practitioner isn't on that object outside, but how we relate to that thing. So we're not negating that experience, but we're learning how to mitigate our experience. So right when that semi-catastrophic thought comes up is right when we practice with the mindful breath to stop it in its tracks, right? So as we breathe in, we are aware. What we call it simple recognition. So simple recognition means we just recognize it on a certain level without going into it more deeply. We learn how to touch it, recognize it, and put it down, rather than touch it, lift it up, and breathe life into it. Okay? So thinking is a very prevalent part of our suffering because it feeds our worry. It takes us away from what is actually happening, and now we're not taking care of ourselves in the present moment. So when we first give rise to a thought, and that happens automatically, we do what we are learning to do here. First, we stop with the breath, right? We breathe in, knowing that we are breathing in. We breathe out, knowing we are breathing out. And we breathe in and we are aware. We just recognize. It's an active practice not to pick it up And I like to use the word simple recognition because when we say simple, it simplifies things. It's not complicated. It doesn't have to be as complicated as we have kind of habitually made it into. So we can just simply recognize it is as a worry, for example, without worrying about John going this and that and the other thing. We just recognize it as a thought even. We put a label on it lovingly so that we can take care of it from a place of peace and safety rather than getting embroiled right into the mess of it, right? And then once we breathe and recognize what is there, our practice is to embrace. It means to be lovingly, with care, with love, with compassion, with that thought, that it's there and it's okay. That's a very different message that we send to our body than that it's there and why am I always thinking about that, right? So right in the process, we give ourselves spaciousness by bringing in that energy of love and care and compassion. And from that spaciousness, that clarity, it opens up the space to have a more meaningful relationship with that thought. And that's the practice of just being and continuing to look deeply, to be present, to be attentive to observe the coming, the going, the nature, the flavor, without, again, getting embroiled in the thought. There's a lot of talk about disrupting systems lately because our societies collectively are, there's a lot of conflict. And the first step to disrupting systems has to be an awareness of what you're disrupting. And the training for being able to disrupt a larger system is to know how to disrupt those automatic systems that are going on that we've been inculcated in ourselves. So our way of thinking, there are certain things that we've learned from mom and dad and our families, the way that we relate to security. Many of us have insecurities about our material things, insecurities about our health. And even though they are there, we can abide, we can live with them peacefully, but many of us have gone into overdrive. So we tend to over-worry and overdo in order to address it, rather than taking a step back to relate to it in a more sane way. Right? We don't want to be on that wheel, that hamster wheel that everyone else is on, or that maybe we have already been on. We want to take a step back so that we can take care of issues without it being a reaction. So as this is a retreat, I'd like just to ask us to take a reflection about how we relate to the issue of financial security. Some people choose their jobs because their aim is to make a lot of money. And I wonder, in terms of the conversation in our hearts, do we go further? How much further do we go than that? We want to make enough or a lot of money in order to do what, for example? Can someone give me an example of what is money a means to, ideally, in our society? Yes. Status, okay. Yes. Freedom from work, or freedom, okay. Freedom from worries about security. Yes. Safety. power. Time. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. That's a good question. So I asked that these are ideally what it's a means to, but in living our busy life, in living such a conventionally busy life, I'm not sure many of us actually have the chance to continue to reflect on our relationship of money as a means to these ends, because many people who come to the monastery, they're very busy with their career, and they're in their career because they need to make money, right? But the things that they're heading for, freedom, safety, security, time, they're burnt out. So it seems like it's lost its function as a means to an end, and it has become an end to itself. And so this is the magic of taking a step back. We can have a space to reevaluate these long-held thoughts, these premises and assumptions that we have about what our happiness is really based on. And is how I'm living, is it really addressing those root concerns that I have? So if money is to help us to buy safety, happiness, and freedom, but in the course of making more money, we're more stressed, we're more angry, we're more worried, then it's actually quite, unproductive. It's unproductive. And we ourselves are now having that experience that we can, with mindfulness, learn from. That's not something that's coming from outside, that's our own experience. How tired are you in your daily life? How fulfilled are you in the moment with each step that you make in order to run after that far-flung future of safety, of security? Right? The Buddha had the benefit of witnessing pretty much in succession those, what we call in Zen language, the four mountains, those impending things to wake him up to a deeper reality. But sometimes we don't have that because we're in our track, we're just running after, and all those other things fall by the wayside until something happens, until someone in our family has a heart attack, until there's an accident, until we ourselves fall flat because we've burnt out. Right? So the magic of mindfulness is it gives us space to reconsider our premises, to take a step back. And it takes courage to do that. I know many of us here are already on their track. It's easier when we share with our wake-up friends, our friends who are aging out of college and they're coming into their own. They're still making some wide-open decisions. But many of us here, we already made some, we're entrenched, we feel entrenched. And yet, the Buddha, I think he was 39. Yeah, he was 39 when he reached enlightenment. And yet, there's always that place for us to really wake up to our situation if we have the fortune of learning from ourselves and one another and have the courage to look more deeply at our situation. Okay, so thinking is a big place that we can bring our mindfulness to bear. Another one, more basically, is our emotions. And I want to focus specifically on the emotion of fear, because when we talk about things that drive us, sometimes it's the fear of lacking or not having enough of something that drives us to do. Right? So anxiety, worry, I just want to name them out. If we are feeling anxious, that's not a negative thing. That's just a reflection of our society. And we need time, we need a space to be aware, mindful, to be embracing those things so that they don't continue to drive us. And when you come to a place like this and have a space to really reflect, wow, I'm feeling anxious for most of my day. It's okay to, and it's actually very healthy to be able to acknowledge that, to acknowledge and embrace that. So many of us, we are so driven and we feel so pressured that we have to take drugs in order to keep performing in our areas or in our careers. We want to support and create a different space for all of us, to put that down, to address them more at the root. Remember to take care of not running after those things that make us anxious, but to take care of our relationship with those things so that we can put it down. Again, the imagery of wearing those shoes rather than carpeting the whole world with leather. So they define fear as an aversion for something unpleasant that might happen in the future. I think that's really important to keep in mind of something that might happen in the future, meaning it might not happen in the future too. It's not our current situation, and yet we're already suffering from that imagined thing. Again, mindfulness helps us reclaim sovereignty over that useless, fruitless thinking, to take care of what's happening here. Like one of my sisters said, if it rains, it'll rain and we'll get to that when we get there. That was a question that I remember my mom brought up at one of the gatherings. She had a lot of what ifs. Well, what if that? And the sister replied, well, when it rains, we'll get to that. Right? And in the meantime, and that doesn't mean we shirk responsibility, but it means that we know where to bring our attention so that we can most nourish and care for ourselves, so that we'll be more ready when that rainstorm comes. We won't be like a chicken running around with its head cut off. It's I really wish, I really hope that we come out of this practice with the firm conviction that mindfulness is not an escape, but it is a very concrete way of addressing some very deep sensations of feelings of unpleasantness in us. Okay, so fear is a worry about the future, something that we don't want, that we don't like, that we want to avoid. How does that relate to our career path and the way that we engage in our work? When we are fearful of losing something, then we tend to grasp onto the things that we're fearful of losing, right? And greed and grasping are a cause of suffering because it takes us outside of the simplicity of the present moment, of feeling enough is enough, of running after something so that we will place our happiness in another person's hands or in the hands outside. So the emotion of fear is closely related to that seed of greed in us. Goodness gracious. Sorry. Greed. Okay. Greed is that desire to obtain, to grasp, to own, to possess, and it takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of energy to be running after and to hold. It takes a lot less energy to let go or to share. In a community like this, we train to share. Whatever we receive in terms of donations, whatever we have as personal belongings, we train to know that this also is belonging to my brothers and sisters. It's not mine alone. And that gives us a lot of space But we don't have to accumulate a lot of things. And we also have that every day, we have that seed water, that what we have belongs to you, what you have belongs to me. We share. It's a very wonderful way of conserving resources. But when we come from a place of fear, then we have a tendency to try to conserve and keep for ourselves. And just that feeling of closing is very the opposite of the opening of our heart, of being spacious, of being equanimous, of being able to let go of things. So how many of us have the time in our life to just acknowledge when there's an emotion that comes up and not feel like we have to hide it? In high school, I don't know why, but English class always made me cry because we talked about literature. So I always wanted to come in wearing sunglasses, but I knew that would be too weird. But I always cried, and I always felt embarrassed to cry in front of others. And that's just high school. So I can imagine when you go out to other spheres, social spheres, at work, when you have things like panic attacks, anxiety, when you feel down, you feel depressed, I can imagine just how hard it may be to just acknowledge that for yourself and feel okay to be vulnerable with your friends, your colleagues. It's very understandable. And because it's hard to do that, that's why it's even more important that we find spaces like here, find spaces to really tend to our spiritual well-being, because society isn't easy to take care. You know, we create intentional spaces like this so that we can talk about that. Yeah, what was that feeling of rage about? What was that feeling of deep, deep depression about? That deep irritation about? So it doesn't fester. And lastly, fourth area I'd like to invite us to bring mindfulness to bear is our way and our actual choices. There's a famous fable, from Aesop's Fables, called The Dog in the Shadow. The story goes like this. A dog somehow found a piece of meat and very happily grabbed it and was taking it back to its home. As it crossed a bridge, it looked over and saw reflected in the water another dog, much larger, with a piece of meat very much like its own. And so, mistaking it for another dog and very covetous of that piece of meat, he lunged for that piece of meat and then he lost his meat into the water. Yeah. Greed. When something comes up, a strong feeling, a trigger, we often hear that word, a trigger, we tend to think that we have no space and we are the victim. And sometimes that's true. And maybe initially it may be true. But we have choices that we can make, that we can create for ourselves when we engage in the practice of mindfulness. When we take that pause, then we realize that something has happened, but we don't have to actually react in the same way that we may have always reacted to that. It may be something as simple as your spouse's word choice, or a certain look on your child's face, or someone cutting you off on the road. Because mindfulness means that we are practicing to stop, it means that we naturally do not water that seed of reactivity. So we now have a choice to stop instead of reacting. That's a big revelation for many of us. Oh, I have a choice to not be angry. Now, I might not have the capacity yet, but the beginning is to realize that, oh, there's actually a fork in the road here. It's not a given that once this happens, I have to always fly off the handle, the broom handle. That's the beginning of awakening right there. Oh, there's a choice. I have a choice. And what makes it easier is that first step, we're grounding ourselves in the nourishment of the breath. I don't know about you, but when I'm tired and I disconnect from everything and I take those deep breaths when I'm lying down, it's so restful. It's so restful for my head, and my body feels it. Let's take maybe a few breaths just to come back to that feeling of nourishment of the now. It means we drop our thinking and we just fully, with that delicious, delicious, delicious breath. Okay. How many of us in that space of 3 breaths felt a little sleepy? Yeah. Okay. So this is something that I'm not good at, but something that just to raise awareness, that being attentive to is different from just falling asleep. Meaning not being, just kind of being attentive means to be alert to what is happening. And when we're falling drowsy, it means that we've kind of disconnected with what's happening and we're just kind of resting in that space without awareness. So as we continue to train, we train to be still, peaceful, but alert, like attentive, not drowsy. And that's why when we do sitting meditation, we often share about this. When we are in a place of drowsiness, there are ways to practice to come back into that middle way between extreme alertness and extreme drowsiness. There's that middle attentiveness of being still, but being quite aware so that we can learn about ourselves, so we can learn from others, so we can bring in more insight, wisdom into ourselves. Okay, the other aspect about stopping is we have a choice. The other aspect about choice is that we have the choice not just to stop, but to let go. The image like I shared before, it's much easier to let go. And for those of us who think letting go is a capitulation, it's actually embedded in the larger picture. We let go of the smaller things, the minutiae, in order to see the forest for the trees. So similarly, when we step back, we think we have an argument with someone. We have an anger, an irritation with someone. Instead of getting into the minutiae and getting lost into the story of how this person has this and that and the other thing about their imperfections, we don't get lost in that. We let go of the small things and we come back to the larger picture. My mind is agitated. I'm feeling angry. We take care of it from that space so that we don't waste our energy over the small things. So I'd like to call that going metta, having an overview of things. It gives us space. It gives us time. I've been told that micromanaging is not a cool thing. And I know that for myself when I witness that in myself. Okay, so So I'd just like to end here, that we've had a overview of how mindfulness can go, kind of like it can go more and more deeply into our areas of challenge and suffering. The way we think, the way we relate to our emotions. It's not something that can be something embarrassed, but something that we can bring into the embrace. The way we make choices. And it all begins with the stopping, the attentiveness of the breath, pairing that breath with that thing that we name with love, being with it, observing it, arising and declining over and over and over again. And if you feel that Blue Cliff is a relatively peaceful place, it's because the brothers and sisters here, we try our best to do that every day with all the things that come up in community every day. You know, we are not, by any stretch of the imagination, we are not a perfect community, but collectively we hold this space for ourselves and for you, because we have a full conviction that mindfulness practice brings about transformation, brings about peace, can create an oasis for not just ourselves, but for a larger society. So we come back to this. If you have touched this urgency, you've touched dissatisfaction in your life, enough that you would choose to come to a monastery of all places, to go inward rather than outward, then the next step is to invest fully in these practices so that you can then learn from yourself. Hear yourself. You can then be aware of and learn from those around you, whether it's your intentional community or it's from the past mistakes and experiences of your family members, your colleagues. And then so you can choose a new path for yourself, just like the Buddha did. I guess I've been kind of contemplating this question across this time of just what does it take to give us enough courage to change? I guess that's an open question for all of us here. But courage and conviction are two qualities that are necessary for us to transform. And for our friends in the Business People Retreat, a special thank you to you, because we know you've come from very far away. Maybe this environment is a very different, opposite environment from the environment that you tend to have to be involved in. So it's a deep investment. And for that investment to continue to bear fruit, it needs support. Regular spaces, coming into regular spaces like this, to water that seed of courage. What makes a prince have the courage to leave everything behind, despite everyone telling him that these are the things that you want in life? These are the things that everyone wants in life, to have an easy life, to have a safe life, to have a life of leisure, of time. It lies in that conviction and care for our loved ones, really caring for our loved ones. We really want to take care of our loved ones in the deepest way, with those four mountains converging. It lies there. And thank you for your deep listening, and enjoy the rest of the day of mindfulness. Thank you.
All right, dear friends, if we could just have